Once again, good morning. It is good to see you. Somebody's having a good morning anyway, one of y'all. The rest of y'all just ain't sure yet. It is good to see you this morning. If you have your Bibles, I'm going to invite you to look with me in the book of Hebrews chapter number 11. Hebrews chapter number 11. We've been camped out in chapter 11 here for a little while. Now as we have continued our study through the book of Hebrews, and as we have come to chapter 11, it's very interesting that chapter 11 kind of gives us it kind of takes us back through the Old Testament. As we went back into the early verses of chapter 11, we began with Abel, and really even before then we began with creation. And then we, as we continued there, we went to Abel and to Enoch, and then to Noah, and then to Abraham, and so we've kind of went through the book of Genesis and looked at some of these folks who lived a life of faith. And then we come to verse 23 of chapter 11, and we move out of Genesis kind of into Exodus. And we come to a man that most of us are very familiar with. And that is a man by the name of Moses. And so we look here at verse 23 of Hebrews chapter number 11. And it says, "By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of God of the king, for he endured as seeing him who was invisible. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians, assaying to do, were drowned." So here, as we look at these few verses, we find what we find here are decisions. We find decisions. Anybody in here ever had to make a decision? Yeah. Everybody in here made a decision this morning. You had to make a decision on whether or not you wanted to be here, whether or not you were going to be here, and along with many others. And so, we've all made decisions. And truthfully, we've probably all made some decisions that we are absolutely proud of. And then we've made some that we're not so proud of. We made some decisions that we wish we could go back and do a different way, but we can't. But what I want us to understand is that decisions are important, but the important thing that we need to see here are that we need to make decisions by faith. By faith. And we do. We find several things here in our text. And again, it says, we go back to verse 23, "By faith Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw that he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment." So Moses, when he was born, obviously you go back, and the Pharaoh of that time had become very concerned with the Hebrew people, because they were great in number. And so, things were looking bad. And so he was afraid that at any time those Hebrew people could revolt, and they'd be able to conquer the Egyptians and overtake them just because of the sheer size of the number of people that they had. And so he put out a decree, he put out a message that all male babies were to be born, or that were to be born would be killed. And so here what we find is that Moses was born during that time. Moses is born, and so he's born to Hebrew people. His mother Jochebed and his father Amram. How about that? Y'all put those, anybody that's looking to have kids, you put those two right on the top. All right, Jochebed and Amram. All right, yeah. Can't you just hear them hollering at each other across the house? Anyway, so they're he's born, and you know, when you look at this, his parents had a decision to make. His parents had a decision. So what decision do they make? What do they decide to do? You know, here they are. They have this newborn baby, whom, by the way, when you look at the text, it tells us, it says that because they saw that they hid him because they saw that he was a proper child. He was a good-looking boy, healthy baby, nothing wrong with him. And they thought, we can't let him be killed. We can't let them just take and kill him. And so they hid him. And you can just imagine that as they are praying and trying to figure out how in the world are we going to keep this baby. Because they're going to find out, they're going to see him, they're going to hear him, they're going to want to know where he came from and this, that, and the other. And so they have a decision to make. And so they begin, I can imagine, to think back, how does God preserve people? And there's no doubt that at some point maybe they thought back to Noah. And how God had preserved those 8 precious souls in the ark from the flood. And so they would build an ark, not the same exact kind that Noah had built, but they would build an ark out of bulrushes. And so they would take and they would build that little ark or boat, and they would place Moses in it. And if that was not enough, they would take him and place him in the Nile River. Anybody ever seen or heard anything about the Nile River? Yeah? Usually it has something to do with crocodiles and other things in there that you don't want nibbling at your toes. Because they won't just nibble, they'll take them off. So they have a decision to make. They have a decision. So they decide, you know what? We're going to build this ark. We're going to put this baby in it. And then we're going to take and set him in those crocodile-infested waters of the Nile River. Now, I'm just going to tell you that would have had to have taken some kind of faith to do that. To set him in that river and to let him go. Even. And so, but I love this because when we look at it in verse 23, it says that they hid him 3 months of his parents because they saw that he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. They weren't afraid. You want to know why they weren't afraid? Because they had faith. You see, you have to understand that there's ultimately one thing that will help you conquer your fear and being afraid. And you know what that is? It's faith. Faith will overcome fear. It's the antidote to fear. And so they weren't afraid. Why? Because they had faith. They had faith to hide Moses. They had faith to build this ark out of bulrushes and put him in the crocodile-infested waters of the Nile River. And so then they would let him go. And it just so happened, as little baby Moses is floating down the Nile River, that Pharaoh's daughter is just down the river from where they put him in. And she hears a cry. And they pull him out. And it's just, to me, it's amazing how God works, because she chose Moses' mother to be the one that would nurse him and take care of him. She chose Moses' mother to be his nursemaid. Of all the people, again, there's lots of people there, and so they would choose Moses to be raised, basically, in a sense, until he was old enough to be weaned off from his mother by his mother. They weren't afraid because of faith. They had faith to put him in. Again, all these decisions made by faith. It was the decision. I'm just going to tell you, I believe that this parental decision that we see that was made here by Jochebed and Amram, I'd be foolish if I didn't think, and you would be foolish, I believe, if you didn't think that that had some impact on Moses' life. His parents living by faith. His parents showing that, hey, even though he was just a baby, these decisions would impact his life. They could have said, hey, you know what? We're not really that close to him. He's a newborn baby. If they're going to take him and kill him, better than them to take him and kill him now than to take him and kill him when he's older. There's all kinds of things that they could have made. They could have made decisions that they would have regretted for the rest of their life, but they made decisions based on faith. And I believe it would not only, obviously, it impacted Moses' life because he wouldn't be here. He wouldn't have been there if his parents hadn't acted by faith. We wouldn't be talking about him today if his parents had not acted by faith, if they were not living by faith. But then we move down to verse number 24. It says, by faith Moses, when he was come to years, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So he would be moved into the palace. He would become known by all the people as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Living in the palace doesn't seem like a bad deal for a boy that was tossed into the Nile River, a boy who should have been dead. So he was moved into the palace, and yet we find here that Moses made a decision. And what a big decision it is, because it tells us here that he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Now I want you to think about that. There's no doubt in my mind, as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, that had he chose to continue to live and to continue to dwell in the palace there, and accept the ways of the Egyptians and do what Pharaoh said and learn from Pharaoh, that at some point in time, Moses, even though he was a Hebrew by birth, he would have become heir to the throne. And so some point and some time in his life, Moses had a choice. And he chose not to be called or identified as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And that was a decision that he was making that said, you know what, I don't care about the heir to the throne. I don't care about sitting on the throne of the most powerful nation in the world of its day. I want you to think about that. There's not many people in this world today that if they had that handed to them as Moses would have, they wouldn't say, well, I can compromise just a little bit right here. I don't like it. I may not even agree with it, but I can compromise just a little bit, right? If it means that that's what I got to do to get to the throne of the most powerful nation in the world. Sounds like something some politicians do, don't it? It's a little compromise. Sounds like something a lot of Christians do, by the way. Just a little compromise. Just a little here or a little there. I know I don't like it. I don't agree with it. But it's just to get me where I want to be in life. Maybe where you want to be, you ain't got no business being there. We ever think about that? And so Moses has a decision to make, and he makes it. He has made his mind up, and he says, I am not going to be identified, recognized as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. By the way, this is a personal decision that he makes. He didn't have a whole lot of Hebrew influence in his life living in the palace of Pharaoh, I'll guarantee you. But he makes this personal decision. And he says, I'm not going to be identified as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. I'm not going to be identified with, hey, I don't like the Egyptians. Their God is wrong. Their worship is wrong. Their morals and their values are wrong. And I'm not going to be identified with that. Boy, I wish God's people today would make that stand. I wish God's people today would say, you know what? I don't agree with this. I don't like this. It does not identify with what I believe. I stand spiritually, and so I don't want anything to do with it. Instead, we tend to do the opposite, and we compromise, and we make, we just make bad decisions, to be honest with you. Listen, does it make sense for Moses to be willing? Because, hey, we could justify it. We could justify this. Moses, I believe, could have justified this. Just as Christians today justify a lot of things that they do that are wrong. Moses, hear me out. Moses could have looked at it from this perspective. Hey, I have the opportunity to be heir to the throne of the most powerful nation in the world. So let me just do what I got to do to get there. And then once I'm there, man, the impact that I'm going to have for God. Oh, I'm going to have a major impact for God whenever I get to that position. Never mind the fact that if you want to keep that position, you have to continue doing what you did to get there, which was not godly things. It was not upholding God's standards and God's values. Listen, if you have to compromise to get somewhere in life, if you have to compromise biblical standards, if you have to compromise morals and values to get somewhere in life, let me tell you, you have no business being there whatsoever. Because if you're willing to compromise to get there, you're going to have to compromise to stay there. Moses said, hey, it doesn't make sense for me to walk away from something that's going to be handed to me. This power, this prestige. But however, I've said it and I'll continue to say it as we continue to talk about faith, that listen, being obedient and making decisions based on faith does not always make sense. It doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always add up. It doesn't always, we can't understand. But it's a decision that has to be made. He refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. But look at verse 25. He's making a decision to not be identified as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. However, because he's doing that, look what he's choosing. It says in verse 25, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God. Huh? Moses, you up being the heir to the throne, you would give up all of that, and you would rather suffer affliction with the people of God? That's the decision he was making. Listen, we give up things a lot of times. If you're making decisions based on faith, sometimes that means that you're going to suffer affliction along the way. Because people aren't going to like your decisions. People aren't going to question your decisions. People are going to, because you don't, you take a stand maybe against something that they like or they want to be a part of their life. And because you don't, hey, they don't like you anymore and you're a bad person. Because you're taking a stand, you're making a decision based on faith. Because you would choose to rather suffer affliction than to be identified with the things of this world. Second part of that verse in 25 says that he'd rather suffer affliction with the people of God, look at this, than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Let's go ahead and establish something right now. Sin, the thing that God hates, the things that you and I are supposed to abstain from, sin, can I just tell you that it's pleasurable. It's enjoyable. I know that doesn't make sense to us sometimes to think about that. However, what we fail to realize is the latter part of that, and some people think that they have arrived at a point where, hey, sin is no longer enjoyable to them. Let me just tell you something, those folks are full of it. Because it's enjoyable. However, what we need to understand is that while it is enjoyable, he says rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Listen, that enjoyment doesn't last forever. You can be involved in sin and you can be engaged in sin. However, please know and understand, while it does bring pleasure and it does bring some form of enjoyment or even satisfaction, it only lasts for a little while. You don't believe me? Maybe we should go and ask the prodigal son, who went and asked his dad. He wanted his inheritance. And so he took it, and what did he do? He went and he enjoyed life. He wasted it on riotous living. He had a good time, but however, guess what? How was it whenever his money was all gone? How was it when his friends were all gone? How was it whenever he found himself laying in the pig pen with his face down in the mud? How was it then? It was enjoyable whenever it was for a season. But then you wake up face down in the pig pen just wanting something to eat, even if it's with the trough that the hogs are eating out of. That's not enjoyable. Listen, sin is pleasurable, but it only lasts for a season. Moses could have went to the throne and enjoyed life, but it would only last for a certain amount of time. One day it would come to an end. And then what? And then what? You see, people today in this world, there's so many people that choose to, they don't want to, they don't want anything to do with this Christianity business. They don't want anything to do with God, and they don't want anything to do with Christ, because, hey, that Bible that you read, it's just so full of all these don't do this and don't do that and stay away from this and abstain from that and be separate, be different. Why? I don't want anything to do with that. It's my life. I want to live it how I want to live it. Because they feel like that they're not going to be able to enjoy life. Because sin brings pleasure. And so many people choose sin and living those types of lives and rejecting Christ. And I'm just going to tell you, one day, those people, listen, their pleasure, their season may be until they leave this world. I don't care if your pleasure is for a lifetime and you say, well, listen, that person there, they enjoyed life. Their pleasure was right up to the day they drew their last breath. Guess what? If they did not know Christ as their personal Savior, The pleasures of sin ended right there. And today, they're suffering torment and pain in a place that they didn't have to. Their season ended. It's over. Decisions. Decisions are personal decisions. I can't make you make any decision that you don't want to make. I have, since I've been at the high school and working with kids there and telling kids, listen, I tell people all the time because, everybody wants to blame somebody else, right? Everybody wants to blame somebody else. And I have to tell my kids the same thing. Hey, nobody can make you do anything. You have the decision. You have the power to make decision, whatever decision you want, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And so a faith decision is a personal decision. And Moses made this personal decision to say, you know what? I don't want anything to do with this. I don't want to, I'm not going to be identified with those Egyptian people. I'd rather suffer affliction with the Hebrew people than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. It says that he esteemed the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. Listen, what I have waiting for me after this life is far greater than anything this world can have. Anything this world can offer, what I have waiting for me is greater. And so we see that faith is a personal decision. But verse 27 says, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Did you see a similarity to something similar there that we seen previously in verse number 23? Here it says in verse 26 that he didn't fear the wrath of the king. In verse 23 it tells us that his parents, that they were not afraid of the king's commandment. Why? How were they not afraid? Pharaoh is the most powerful man in the world at that time. And yet they were not afraid of him. Why? Because faith conquers fear. Think about all those Hebrew people whenever Goliath stood out in the valley and challenged them and mocked their God, and they were afraid. Well, what was the difference between them and David, who was just a teenager? Faith. Faith is what conquered that fear. I'm sure David, there was a part of him that said, man, this guy's big. And all I have is a sling and he's got a sword that's as big as me. But he had faith. Faith conquers fear. Moses is not afraid of Pharaoh. He's not afraid of his wrath. Again, because he understands, I think, who is on his side. And it says, as seeing him who is invisible. He endured. He was willing to go through this because he had seen him who was invisible. Who is the invisible? It's God. Now, I've never seen the invisible. I've never seen Jesus. I've never seen God. I've never physically, I didn't see him die on the cross. For me, I didn't see his blood shed at Calvary. I didn't see any of that with these eyes. But I've seen it with the eye of faith. I've seen it through faith, and that's what again Moses here. He's putting his faith in God. He's enduring just as if he had seen him. He has that much confidence. I'm just going to tell you, we ought to live with that much confidence in our God, that He's going to take care of us. We need to turn away and give the things of the world away and make decisions based on faith. And in verse number 28 it says, through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. This Passover, again, you remember that as Moses was leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, that they finally got down to it, and God said, hey, here's the straw that's going to break the camel's back. I'm going to kill the firstborn there. And so he gave instructions for the children of Israel, the Hebrew people, to take and to kill a lamb, a spotless lamb, and they were to take it and they were to take a hyssop and dip it in the blood of that lamb, and they were to spread it over the doorposts of their home. And he said, if I see the blood spread there, I'll pass over you. And so that night, obviously, you can imagine as the Egyptians, they weren't giving in. They weren't following this mess. And so all the way from the lowest of the low, from the peasant outside of the city who dwelled in a hut, I'm sure cries were heard, all the way up to Pharaoh's palace, as death rampant. Moses, through faith, kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood. By faith, they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians, essaying to do, were drowned. You know, it's very interesting as they finally left they left Egypt and they were getting out of there, and Moses was leading them, and the first roadblock they come to is the Red Sea. And they get to the Red Sea, and now Pharaoh and his men who have said, yeah, go, get out of here, are now trailing them and trying to kill them. And so they're moving through, and they get there, and they come up to the Red Sea, and they can't pass. There's nowhere to go. Understand, we're talking several million people here. It's a lot of folks. There's the Red Sea in front of them, and all around is mountains. They have nowhere to go but God. Would cause a wind, a breeze, whatever you want to call it, to come. And Moses would lift up his staff, and the Bible says that the waters were parted, and he would walk across on dry ground. Now, you know, there's folks out there that have got to try to explain this stuff away. And so people have said, there's been folks that have said that they didn't come to the Red Sea and cross over on dry ground at the Red Sea. It wasn't the Red Sea at all. There's people say, you know, it was the Reed Sea, which is really just a marshy area. Usually has about 6 inches of water in it. And so they crossed over at the Reed Sea. Well, I would, you know, if I was ignorant, I'd believe that. Because then, you know, you might could use that to explain how the Hebrew people crossed over. But how do you explain that Pharaoh and his skilled army would drown in 6 inches of water? All of them. Yeah. Just don't make sense, does it? It's because it's not how it happened. They were at the Red Sea, and God parted the waters. And we see that they passed through on dry ground. And then the Egyptians, they did not get through successfully. They were drowned. Again, both of those, a decision to kill a lamb and sprinkle the blood on the doorpost. That is a decision of faith. That's not something they had seen before. But they did it. And Moses remembered that. And the Jews, by the way, those Hebrew people, they still observe that to this day. It's important to them. They don't want to forget that. Because their history, again, those families, they made faith decisions. Walking across the Red Sea. I'm just going to tell you, and just in case nobody here knows this, I can swim pretty good. But one of my biggest fears is drowning. I don't want to drown. That's not the way. The Lord can take me just about any other way He wants. Please just don't drown me. It just bothers me to think about. And so I'm not sure, as Moses held up that staff, that rod, and the waters are pulled back, I'd have been racing whoever, I'd have been in the front. Get me across here now. Okay? That took faith. To know that, hey, I can't even see what's holding that water up. So what if it falls down on me? Y'all go that way, they'll follow you. They're not going to come after just one guy. I'll go this way. Wouldn't work that way. Sometimes we have to make decisions by faith. But what we see here, and you say, well, we've already heard that, and heard that, and heard that. But what we see here is whenever we make decisions by faith, God's power is present. It may not make sense. We may not understand it. But when we make decisions by faith and we trust God at His Word, His power is going to show up every single time. Decisions. We really need to make sure that we're making decisions based on faith. Parents, we need to make sure we're making decisions based on faith. Sure. I'm sure there was some concern whenever Jochebed and Amram heard the decree that came down from Pharaoh about the killing of babies. But they said, you know what, we're just going to trust God. We don't understand it, but we're going to trust God. We're going to put him in the Nile. I don't know what's going to happen to him, but we're going to trust God. Parents, we've got to live our lives by faith so that our children can see, and even grandparents or aunts and uncles, whoever, so that this younger generation can see that, hey, I'm not making these decisions based on me. I'm not making these decisions because of who I am. I'm making these decisions because I trust God. And I know that if I'm making decisions based on faith, He's going to be there. He's going to take care of me. He's going to provide. He's going to see me through to the other side. Sometimes the decisions we make are tough. I'm sure that was a tough decision that Moses had to say, you know what, I don't want to be identified as Pharaoh's daughter, as Pharaoh's son. I don't want to be identified as that. I'm giving up this lifestyle. I'm giving all this up. And he did it by faith. I tell you, maybe there's some folks here that, we look at both these situations and they said they weren't afraid. Maybe there's some folks that you've not done things in your life. You've not taken out and made that next step or that commitment to God with your life because you're afraid. You're afraid. Well, why don't you stop being afraid and have faith that'll conquer that fear? Maybe you just need to live by faith. Maybe you're like me, and a lot of times you have to have things explained to you. You have to see the big picture. You have to, you want everything just like it ought to be. Listen, we got to live by faith. We got to live by faith. Without faith, remember all the way back in the beginning of this chapter, it tells us that without faith, it's impossible to please God. Let me ask you this morning, are you making decisions based on faith, or have you avoided making decisions because you don't have faith? Trust God. His power is all that you need, and He'll get you through it. Let's stand and pray. Father, we thank you for this day. God, I thank you for each one that's here this morning. God, we thank you for the faith of Moses and for his parents and their faith. God, I pray that this morning that each one of us here would search our hearts and examine our lives and look and see, are we making decisions based on faith, living by faith? Or are we living in fear? Are we afraid to do certain things because of what the outcome may be or the repercussions from it? God, help us just to have fear. God, and that help us to have faith so that we can conquer that fear. Lord, whatever the needs are here today, maybe there's one that, Lord, they've been afraid to commit to you. Or maybe today they would say, you know what, I'm not going to be afraid anymore. I'm just going to have faith that this is what's best for me and my family. Or maybe there's whatever decisions. God, I pray each person here today would like to have your will and your way in their lives. And we ask all these things in Christ's name. Amen. I'm going to ask you